This episode of Hitched to Homicide contains depictions of sexual assault. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is a victim of sexual violence, please call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 800-656-4673, or you can chat online at online.rain.org. All calls are free and confidential.
Anchorage, Alaska, the land of rugged terrain, icy mountains, and endless wilderness. But beneath its serene beauty, one man during the 70s and 80s turned this frozen frontier into a hunting ground for his darkest desires. He was a soft-spoken baker by day and a cold-blooded predator by night. But how did he hide in plain sight? And how did his twisted hunting game last for so very long? This is a chilling tale of a killer in a frozen hellscape. This is Robert Hansen, the butcher, the baker, the nightmare maker, part 2. Hey y'all, I'm Kris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Powell. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for my former family down in Jalapa, Veracruz.
Okay.
Yeah, I was an exchange student in high school, and I was in Jalapa. And,
Hola.
Hola.
¿Cómo está?
Yes. Anyway,
all I know.
bienvenido.
Very nice.
There you go.
Very nice. Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to subscribe to Hitched to Homicide, then like, rate, and review the podcast so other people who are just like you and love true crime can find us. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. I'm getting through them fast today. If you want true crime with us all the time, please go join our closed Facebook group, The In-Laws and Outlaws. Some of them are in-laws. Most of them are outlaws. Just going to tell you now. And some people think their in-laws are outlaws. But go to Facebook and type in H2H In-Laws and Outlaws. Answer a few questions you're in. Go join. I post lots of extra information in there. I'm going to post a lot of extra photos from today's podcast in there. So you might want to join so you can get in there
Come on now.
and see them.
Yep.
You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast.
Yep.
And we also now have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you want to send Rob some coffee.
Send me some coffee.
He needs it, man. This man's working overtime. He's the hardest working man in show business, I'm telling you right now.
As my dad used to say, make hay while the sun shines.
Making hay while the sun's shining.
You got it.
You can find that link in our show notes. And you can also send us a text. The link to that is at the top of the show notes where it says, send Kris and Rob a text.
Yes.
We love them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, last week we talked about Robert Hansen, the mild-mannered baker who liked to arrange for the services of sex workers, then kidnap them and rape them, women who for $300 would go anywhere with him.
Mm.
And they're thinking from his looks, these girls and these women, apparently they felt like they had no apparent reason to fear him.
Right.
And as one rape victim reported, quote, he sort of looked like the perfect dork, end quote.
Nice.
But once they got into his truck or his car, the psychopath appeared and the number of victims accumulated rapidly over the years.
Mm.
So before we get back into this, let me thank some sources.
All right.
Murderpedia, the Department of Psychology at Radford University, LelandHale.com, Find a Grave, Wikipedia, the Anchorage Daily News, the Esterville Daily News, the Anchorage Times, the Daily Sitka Sentinel. Rob loves it when I say Sitka.
Sitka.
The Peninsula Clarion, FBI.gov, The Charlie Project, CBS News, ExploreNorth.com, all that's interesting, TheLineup.com, CrimeLibrary.com, DPSAlaska.gov, Reddit, Medium.com, and First Blood on the A&E channel, and the Big Book of Serial Killers. There are several books out there, and again, as I said last week, the one that seems to be referenced the most is Butcher Baker, The True Account of an Alaskan Serial Killer by Walter Gilmore and Leland E. Hale, and I will post a link to that book once more, and all links to all the other show notes, all the show notes in the show notes, all the links to all the sources in the show notes.
There you go. Well, you ready?
I am.
Well, let's do it.
When we left off, Bob had just bought himself a small plane. He's taken some flying lessons. He's never going to get his pilot's license. He buys himself a little cabin. He wants to be able to fly his victims away from Anchorage and into the wilderness so he can hunt them where no one can hear their screams.
You know, after last week's episode, I started thinking about it. It's like, where's he getting all this money?
Well, he does have a bakery.
Yeah.
So he's making money from that.
Okay.
And then he has his insurance fraud money. That's going to come back and bite him in the butt. Just hang on.
All right.
But he lands this small plane. The reason he likes this small plane is that he can land this small plane on many hundreds of sandbars that are all around the remote areas of Alaska. And Bob has told people he has the plane so he can more easily get to remote areas for hunting. You know, Bob's a big game hunter.
So to speak.
And he's a trophy collector. And the basement of his home is filled with the heads and trophies of all these big game that he has killed.
Right.
But Bob isn't killing all his victims. Some he merely rapes and lets go. Some 30 women will be raped by Bob Hansen and then let go, knowing that they won't go to the police because they're more than likely turning tricks to support their drug habit. He's paying them for sex and then letting them go. But apparently he is raping them.
Right.
Not to mention they're sex workers, and even now in 2025, sex work or prostitution is still illegal in the state of Alaska.
Okay.
Now, police and the women who are working in the topless and strip bars, as well as working in the streets as sex workers, know that too many women are going missing. But many of them need their jobs either to stay afloat or to bankroll their drug habits. July 10th, 1981, 28-year-old Malai Larson is picked up by Bob. Malai was born on August 30th, 1955 in Washington State. There isn't a lot known about her. Her body will be found on April 24th, 1984, 3 years later in a parking lot near the Knik Arm Bridge. When Bob leaves her there, he marks where he has left the body with an X on his aviation map of the area he keeps with him for flying.
Wow.
December 2nd, 1981, 24-year-old Andrea Marie Alteri goes by the nickname Fish. She was last seen taking a cab to the Boniface Mall in Anchorage, Alaska at 11 p.m. She worked as an exotic dancer and planned to meet an unidentified male for a photo shoot. Now remember, that's kind of his go-to.
Right.
I'll give you $200. I'll give you $300, $500 if you'll come with me and pose for me.
Right.
She had brown hair, brown eyes. She may have used the alias of Lisa. She danced under the nickname Enchantment. When she's last seen, she's wearing a black leather jacket, a red sweater, blue jeans, brown cowboy boots, a gold-colored ring set with a pearl, a gold-colored ring set with 2 pearls, an antique wedding band with a rose-set top, and a custom-made fish necklace. The necklace was with a gold chain and had a small sterling silver pendant in the shape of a salmon with a diamond setting for the eye.
Wow.
So very specific, right?
Right.
She may have been carrying a black zippered purse and a small floral print makeup bag. But after Bob met her at the mall, he threatened her with a gun, abducted her, blindfolded her, handcuffed her, and took her to the Knik Arm Bridge. They took a car to a service road off Palmer Highway. He unbound her there. He sexually abused her. And when she fought back, he killed her with a .22 Browning automatic pistol.
Wow.
He then stole Andrea's necklace, weighted a duffel bag with gravel, tied it to the dead woman, and threw her off the bridge into the Knik River. Her body will never be found.
Really?
Bob did keep a memento from the murder, the fish necklace that she wore. So he likes his trophies that hang on the wall.
Well, most serial killers, I mean, they do. They keep a memento.
A lot of them will keep a little trophy, and then they can pull it out and look at it again, and they get that thrill all over again.
Yeah.
But I think Bob Hansen, it's more of a trophy. He's proud of it, just like, the rams and the deer and the elk and the bear that are in his, basement.
Right.
As you might remember from part 1, on September 12th, 1982, a body is found in a shallow grave off the Knik River. When they used dental records, they discovered that the body is that of Sherry Morrow. There's so much more to this story, because the Knik River Valley is a place that many hunters go, not just Bob. It's 25 miles from the city of Anchorage, with a winding gorge that is carved by prehistoric glacial ice. I'm telling you, I think Alaska is like the last great frontier.
Yeah.
It's exactly, you can imagine like dinosaurs walking around there.
Right. I've always I wanted to do one of those Alaskan cruises.
Yeah, so you can go in and see everything.
Yeah.
Yep. But there are lots of mountain goats, Dall sheep, black bears, and moose. And on September 12th, John Daly and Audie Hollow, 2 off-duty Anchorage police officers, are out hunting on the Knik River. And according to the book written by Leland Hale and Walter Gilmore, these 2 didn't have much luck that day, and it was starting to get dark, and they decided to call it a day. The men were familiar with this area, and they cut across a wide sandbar. But as they made their way up the river, they can see a boot sticking out of the sand.
Ooh.
Like a boot that got stuck in the sand. You know, like you had to leave it behind when you're walking because it's so stuck.
Okay.
So at first, they're just kind of like, somebody lost a boot. And normally it wouldn't give them pause. But when they looked closer, they also see a partially decomposed bone joint sticking out of the sand.
Wow.
And these 2 veteran police officers start backing up, realizing that they've stumbled into a crime scene.
Right.
And they don't want to disturb any evidence. They note the location of the body. They go back to their camp before calling it in. Now, Sergeant Raleigh Port was the man assigned to cover the investigation, a man who was considered one of the top investigators on the force. He was meticulous with his crime scenes, and he was known to spend hours going over even the smallest areas.
So he was the real deal.
He would not leave until he knew for certain that he had everything, every shred of evidence, every hair,
every grain of sand,
every fiber.
Yep.
And before they moved the body, he had photos taken from every possible angle, and then he carefully examined the body before he allowed them to bag and tag her. He sifted for hours. And when he did, he found a single shell casing from a .223 caliber bullet.
Okay.
.223 caliber bullet.
Right.
And this is a bullet for a high-powered rifle, like an M16 or an AR-15 or a Mini 14, which is the gun Bob is using to hunt.
Wow.
Now, they knew before they identified Sherry Morrow by her dental records that she'd been dead for about 6 months and that she had 3 gunshot wounds to her back. Also found with the body were ace bandages, and police think that perhaps she was blindfolded when she's murdered. And who else was blindfolded and left to die in the elements when she tried to escape?
Oh, yeah.
18-year-old Celia Beth Van Zanten. Remember?
Right. Yeah.
She got away. She ran away blindfolded and fell off this steep ravine.
Then she tried to climb back up.
And died of exposure.
Yeah.
She was naked from the waist down. Yeah. And she was discovered by two brothers hunting on Christmas Day. So is Bob blindfolding all of them to run into the woods while he hunts them? Does he take the blindfolds off before he lets them flee on purpose so he can track them and kill them? We don't know just yet.
Right.
Sherry Morrow, who worked as a dancer at the Wild Cherry, was just another girl who took Bob up on his offer of $500 for modeling photos, and she was last seen on November 17th, 1981. Now, when she is found, police look back to Eklutna Annie, who was stabbed in the back. But just because one is stabbed and one is shot doesn't mean they're not the same killer.
Right.
But there wasn't enough evidence to link Eklutna Annie, the Jane Doe,
Sure.
to Sherry. And publicly, the police are telling the Anchorage Daily News, quote, "We don't believe we have a mass murderer out there, some psycho knocking off girls," end quote. But privately, they knew that in the past 2 years, there'd been an uptick in the number of missing persons reports being filed, and many of which were topless dancers and sex workers. But at the same time, the police thought these are the women who are kind of loners to begin with. They try to stay under the radar, and they travel from city to city. So are they really missing? We just don't know.
Right.
May 26, 1982, 23-year-old Sue Luna is picked up by Bob. She, too, voluntarily went with him as she had agreed to be paid $300 for a photo shoot. She met Bob in a diner parking lot in Anchorage. The next day, she's reported missing. Bob abducted her, flew her in his plane into the wilderness, and allowed her to run naked into the forest so he could stalk her and hunt her down.
Wow.
Bob shot and killed her, then buried her in the Knik River. Her body will be found on April 24th, 1984, 2 years after she disappears.
Gee whiz.
Now, every time he kills somebody, he takes this aviator's map he has, which is like, above topographical map.
Right.
And he makes a tiny little X where he buries them. 21-year-old Tammy Peterson started dancing at a young age. She was a tap dancer, a jazz dancer. And when she got a little bit older, she participated in an amateur contest in a club north of Seattle. And by club, I can only deduce they meant an exotic dancing club. She wins the competition, and then she packs her bags for Alaska to dance in the clubs there that promised big money. She leaves for Anchorage in 1981, just before her 20th birthday. Each week, she called her mother. Everybody call your mom. Call your mom.
Yep.
If you hear this today and I say call your mom, pick up the phone, call your mother.
Do it.
But a couple of weeks go by and Tammy's family hasn't heard from her. And the last her family heard from her was during a phone call on August 7th. And when she called, she claimed to have been offered money to pose for photographs. And her family calls the police to report her missing in August of 1982. And the police are like, okay, we'll take it down. But women come to Anchorage because they don't want to be found. They come and go.
Sure.
And your daughter just might show back up again. But when nothing is done and her missing persons case goes nowhere, Tammy's mother calls the police again in September of 1982 and tells them that she's really concerned for her daughter's safety. And it's around this time that the dancers in all the clubs started a buddy system. You couldn't leave the club alone, and you didn't let your buddy leave the club either.
I'm surprised that with all the missing people or girls that came up missing, that they wouldn't be a little bit more cautious. I mean, it's been going on for a while now, right?
It is, but once again, girls come and go, and they just don't show up again.
True. Okay.
But they have this buddy system, which made me think of Toy Story, where Woody says, if you don't have one,
a moving buddy. If you don't have one, get one.
Get one.
Yep.
Get a buddy.
Yep.
Now it's 1983, and Bob Hansen has no intention of stopping. He's escalating. February 1983, 24-year-old Angela Lynn Fettern was last seen on 4th Avenue in Anchorage. She's not reported missing until May of 1983. The owner of a nightclub where Angela worked reported that she was one of his dancers, and she had just gone missing. Bob had kidnapped her and murdered her just as he'd done the others. Angie's body was found on April 26, 1984, on a small lake near the larger Figure 8 lake. She was known by most everybody as Angie, but Angela Fettern had a troubled past. She was a troubled soul. Her sister in Seattle knew that she was into drugs and turning tricks to support her habit. Her sister reached out all the time. She tried to help, and so did her mother, but they both failed. When Angie's mother, Mary Radford, who lived in Seattle, learned that her daughter's body had been found, she told the Associated Press, quote, "I was prepared for it. I knew something was wrong when she stopped calling last year. In a way, there's some relief. You wonder what happened to them until you know for sure," end quote.
Sad.
It's so sad. Then sometime in March of 1983, 22-year-old Delynn Wren Frey, who went by the nickname Sugar, was last seen. Sugar was born on June 6, 1963 in Baltimore, Maryland. She had 3 sisters, and her entire family seemed to have lived in Hawaii. Now, if your family lives in Hawaii, why are you in Alaska? Yeah.
Wow.
She wasn't reported missing immediately, but she'd been picked up and murdered by Bob. Her body was found on August 20th, 1985, on a Knik River sandbar by a pilot trying out new tires. So Bob's not the only one who's got his little small plane
Right.
and flying into the woods and landing on these sandbars.
And I don't know if you've ever seen these kind of planes. I'm assuming it's the same kind. They come in they have big tires on them, and they come in very slow, and they literally just almost stop and just touch the sandbar.
I mean, I've got pictures, which I will show and I will post in the In-Laws and Outlaws. To me, it looks like a go-kart with wings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they are.
There's just not a whole lot to it.
And it takes 30 feet for them to take off. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. It's very lightweight. They don't keep a lot of weight in it.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that if you kill an elk, you got to gut it there. You've got to field dress it there and then put it in your plane and get it home, right? But unfortunately, Bob's not taking anything back with him on the plane.
Yeah.
But Sugar, she was buried as a Jane Doe in an Anchorage cemetery. It wasn't until an Alaskan state trooper recognized her jewelry in a case file that her body was disinterred for further medical study. And it was then that she was positively ID'd as Delynn Frey, or Sugar. Her family had her body cremated, and her ashes were sent to Hawaii. Also in March of 1983, March 25th to be exact, 22-year-old dancer Teresa Watson was last seen in Anchorage. She told her roommate that she was meeting a man who would give her $300 in exchange for an hour or two of company.
Stop going to get your picture shot.
Yeah, well, this wasn't pictures. This was just, I'm going to pay you $300 just so you can hang out with me for a couple of hours.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to talk.
Yeah, if it sounds too good to be true,
It
it's
is.
pretty much, yeah.
Bob abducted her at Scenic Lake. After he killed her, he had to abandon her where he hunted her down because the earth in the region was too frozen to bury her. So she is found just a year later on April 26th, 1984. So he didn't even get to bury her because the ground was too hard. It was too frozen.
Just left her lying there.
Yeah. On April 25th, 1983, 30-year-old Paula Golding was a dancer in Anchorage. Bob offered her money before kidnapping her. He drove her to his plane, and once they reached a remote spot, she fought him with everything she had, and according to Bob, she tried to get away. She flees naked into the woods, and of course, Bob hunts her down, shooting her in the back
Man.
with a .223 rifle as she flees.
Jeez.
On September 2nd, 1983, she was discovered on the Connect River, buried in a shallow grave. Bob shot her in the back, but because her clothing was undamaged, he put her clothes back on her body before he buried her.
Wow.
Paula was born on June 4th, 1951, in Grand Canyon, Arizona. And now, an Alaskan state trooper had been assigned to the Sherry Morrow murder to determine if it was an isolated case or not. Because remember, they really wanted to try to connect that to Eklutna Annie.
Right.
His name was Sergeant Lyle Haugsfen, and he worked with the Anchorage Police Department, sharing and comparing notes on missing girls. They had Sherry. There was the body of Eklutna Annie, and then another body was found in a gravel pit. Joanne Messina, another topless dancer who'd gone missing on May 19th, 1980. Joanne Messina is last seen in Seward, Alaska. She went out to dinner with Bob and will be dubbed the Bear Lady by the Alaskan State Troopers. We've talked about her in the last podcast.
Sure.
They're trying to connect these three murders. And just to remind you, Bob had driven her and her dog to a distant place by the Snow River.
That's right.
And then he hit her with a .22 caliber revolver before shooting her twice. Her body is discovered on July 8th, 1980, but Sergeant Haugsfen is thinking there's got to be a connection. There's got to be a connection.
Right.
He knew it, but he hadn't put all the pieces together just yet.
All right.
9 months later in Anchorage, Alaska, sex worker 17-year-old Cindy Paulson is offered $200 for oral sex in the car. It's Bob Hansen. Living in Anchorage with her mother, Cindy Paulson was a 17-year-old dancer and sex worker who frequented many of the same establishments that Bob was visiting while looking for targets. And on June 13th, 1983, Bob Hansen pulled up to Paulson in his car and propositioned her. When she gets into the car, he cuffs one of her hands. As she's trying to get loose, Bob pulls a gun on her. Now, Bob's wife and kids are away visiting Darla's parents. I also read that they were away and in Europe. So back to your point, Bob's making some money.
Yeah. Pulling down some coin.
So his house is empty. He's a bachelor. He takes Cindy to his home in the upper class area of Muldoon, just outside of town. He's got her at gunpoint. Her hands are cuffed. He ties a rope around her neck and ties the other end to a coffee table in his basement downstairs in his home that he shares with his wife and two children.
Man.
Then he lays her on a bearskin rug, and he had unprotected sex with Cindy. He sexually assaults her and tortures her for hours.
Wow.
He chains her to a pillar in the basement of his house. She's surrounded by all these trophies, all the heads of these dead animals he's killed. And he tells her that he liked her, quote, so good that he was going to take her to his cabin and make love to her one more time before bringing her back. Now, by the way, the things that he did to her when he tortured her, I know them. I'm just not even going to tell you because it's just awful because he's a monster.
Man.
Now, according to Cindy, quote, I knew that I was never going to come back, end quote. She had spent hours and hours trapped in his home, and Cindy took note of every detail that she could remember, including the bars he had on his windows and a bullet hole in the floor.
Good for her.
After raping and torturing her repeatedly for hours, and there are accounts of this, I already told you this, Bob's just a monster. Bob lays down on the couch and takes himself a nap while Cindy is still chained to a pillar.
Jeez.
And then about 5 hours later, he woke up and came over there, and I told him, all I want to do is go home because I live with my mom and I won't tell nobody, end quote. After some hours in the home, Bob starts showing Cindy his large collection of hunting trophies. And he originally told her that his name was Don, but she can see his name. She can read his real name listed on the awards.
Ah, yeah.
And Cindy said it was at this moment that she realized he was going to kill her because she now knew his true identity.
Oh, yeah, right.
So she became resolved. She was going to try and escape no matter what, if the chance ever arose, because if she tried to escape and he killed her, he was going to kill her anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
She got nothing to lose.
She's got nothing to lose at this point.
Yeah.
So he tells her he wants to take her to his cabin, this little shack Bob has just outside the city of Anchorage, but it's only accessible by boat or plane.
Mm-hmm.
He unchains her, and at around 5 a.m., Bob drove the two of them to a local airfield called Merrill Field, where his private plane was waiting. Bob parked his car, got out of the car, and told the still handcuffed Cindy Paulson, "Don't you move. If you move, I'll kill you." She has hardly any clothes on. Remember, he does this so they won't hop out of the car and run.
Right.
There was a new seat he had for his plane or something. He's trying to get it all situated in the cockpit. He's got his head in the trunk of his car and in the plane, and he's going back and forth. He puts Cindy in one of the two seats in the cockpit, not the driver's seat, but the other side, the co-pilot.
Right.
And he leaves the door open as he's loading up the plane. And Cindy can see that the door's open. And she thought, and I quote, "I'm getting the out of here," end quote.
Good for her.
"I just ran barefoot in the gravel." She actually leaves her shoes behind, hoping they could become evidence that she'd actually been in his plane. She's 17 years old.
Wow.
Smart thinking.
Yep.
Smart thinking. So wearing no shoes, her hands are still cuffed. She's got one handcuff still on. Her clothes are all disheveled. Cindy sprinted for the nearest street. She just takes off. And Bob turned around just in time to see her escape. And he goes after her, yelling at her to come back. But Cindy made it onto 6th Avenue, and as luck or fate would have it, a driver in a pickup truck just happened to pass by. He took one look at her and he pulls over. She's like frantically waving him down.
Wow.
And after several terrifying and torturous hours with Bob, Cindy Paulson was finally free.
Wow.
She asked the driver, a man named Robert Yount, to take her to a nearby motel, the Big Timber Motel, where her boyfriend/pimp was staying.
Okay.
And when she got inside this hotel, Cindy asked the front desk clerk to make a call for her, and she's just going to wait outside for her boyfriend/pimp to show up.
Okay.
She tells Robert Yount, "Thank you, great, you can go." I mean, this is a tough kid.
Yeah.
But Robert Yount gets in his truck and drives straight to the police department, and he reports the whole thing.
Right.
Now, still at the airfield, Bob makes his way back to his car, and he quickly speeds off. However, there's a security guard there, and he's kind of watching what's going on. He seems hinky.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks he's got this strange behavior. He wrote down Bob's license plate and his car model.
Okay.
Meanwhile, back at the motel, Cindy is still in handcuffs. She got a hold of her boyfriend over the phone at the front desk, and soon after, a motel employee also made a call to the Anchorage Police Department. But Robert Yount was already there when the Anchorage police officer Greg Baker arrived at the motel. He found Cindy still with the handcuff dangling from her wrist. He removed it, and Cindy started telling him her story.
Wow.
Less than an hour after Cindy escapes, she's in a police car headed for the hospital. You know, she's been raped and tortured.
Sure.
And the police officer's like, "It's standard protocol. We've got to take you to the hospital to be examined for sexual assault," right?
Right.
So she gets in this police officer's car, and while they're en route to the hospital, they drive past the same airfield that Cindy had just run away from, and she remembered which area of the airport that she'd been taken to. and what Bob's plane looked like.
Wow.
And Cindy Paulson looks at this cop and says, I know we're going to the hospital, but we got to make a stop first. I want to show you exactly where this plane is.
Wow.
And the police officer pulls off. They go up there, and she leads the police exactly to where Bob Hansen's blue and white plane is still parked.
Oh, man.
Now, the cops are there, and the security guard who wrote everything down comes over and says, hey, let me give you a little more information. This is the make of the car. These are the license plate. And this is everything I know, right?
Right.
And they also gave him the plane's registration.
I feel the noose tightening just a little bit right now.
Oh, you would think, you would hope. Just hang on.
Uh-oh.
Anchorage police contacted the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and they get a final confirmation. And as officers pulled into the hospital with Cindy Paulson, they received a call that the registration for both the car and the plane matched that of Anchorage local Robert C. Hansen, who lived on Old Harbor Road in the very neighborhood where Cindy said she'd been.
Mm.
And Bob fit the description of her kidnapper perfectly.
Wow.
And Cindy even described his stutter.
Oh. Well, you can't fake that.
Yeah. Officer Baker and a group of fellow officers went directly to Bob Hansen's house. Bob became outraged when confronted with the young woman's charges, this Cindy's charges. He claimed to have never met the girl and stated that she was probably trying to shake him down for money. And to him, the entire story was absurd. Quote, you can't rape a prostitute, can you? End quote.
Jeez, what a scumbag.
Yeah. Bob went on to state that his wife and 2 kids were vacationing and said that he'd spent the entire evening with 2 friends. And these 2 friends back up his alibi. And his alibi checks out, and there are no formal charges filed.
Oh, man. Who are the 2 friends?
2 of his buddies.
Wow.
But police were still reluctant. I mean, they wanted to bring him in, even though he has a record. He's no stranger to trouble with the law.
Right.
He is the local baker that's really well liked in the community, and the cops are in his bakery all the time buying donuts.
Yeah.
Donuts. I got donuts.
Yeah.
So no formal charges were filed because he had an alibi.
Right.
Just 1 month after his buddies give him this alibi with the police, Bob is out hunting again.
Yeah.
He picks up a 19-year-old girl on July 19th, 1983, when her partial skeletal remains are found in April of 1984 in Palmer, Alaska, near Horseshoe Lake. The police can't identify her, and no one comes forward, so they name her Horseshoe Harriet. She was a white female with brown hair. She was about 5'4". She was last seen wearing a wool scarf, knit coat and sweater, blue jeans, wool socks, leg warmers, it is the 80s, and a nylon bra. And when she's found on April 25th, 1984, she was carrying Cool cigarettes, condoms, a compact, and a large comb.
Okay.
Now, it's unknown if she was involved in sex work or not at that time. But in 2021, forensic genealogy was used to determine her true identity, and they learned that Horseshoe Harriet was Robin Pelkey, who lived in Anchorage.
Okay.
So from 1984 all the way to 2021, she was just Horseshoe Harriet.
That's amazing they can do that all that time later.
But now they know she's Robin Pelkey.
Wow.
But when things start to calm down, the police are thinking, okay, it's calmed down a little bit in Anchorage, and the missing persons reports on the young women are down. This is when they found the body of Paula Golding, one of the topless dancers we've already talked about. She's been missing for 5 months at this point.
Okay.
September 2nd, 1983, 17-year-old Paula is discovered on the Knik River, buried in a shallow grave. Bob had flown her into the wilderness, set her free, stalked her, hunted her, shot her in the back with a .223 caliber bullet. but because her clothing was undamaged, he'd killed her and again redressed her before he buried her.
What's up with that?
I don't know. He's a strange cat.
Yeah, big time.
When the two bodies, Sherry Morrow and Paula Golding, were found in the Matanuska Susitna Valley, and they'd both been shot with a .223 shell, and even one body had the shell casings beside her body. Bob Hansen, the avid hunter who'd been caught with Cindy Paulson, who told police that he was going to fly her somewhere and kill her, that he's tied her up and raped her and tortured her for hours, the police couldn't really let that go, even though we had this alibi.
Right.
Bob Hansen was their prime suspect, but the police needed proof. And this led to the involvement of the FBI, including now retired FBI agent John Douglas, who helped pioneer the field of criminal profiling.
Oh, wow.
And whose story is depicted in the Netflix series Mindhunter. He's played by Jonathan Groff, who's the younger guy, not Holt McCallany, who plays Bill Tench. And please, Netflix, for the love of all true crime people, please bring this series back. It is so good.
Yeah.
But John Douglas put together a psychological profile of the killer based on the details of the case and the injuries inflicted on the recovered bodies. He theorized that the killer was an experienced hunter with low self-esteem and a history of being rejected by women. And that he likely had a stutter.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
I don't know where he pulled that
Yeah.
from.
Wow. That's
But
crazy.
yes.
Okay.
And even though he'd been cleared several times before, there's no doubt about it, Bob Hansen fit the profile exactly. And what's more, he owned a bush plane and a cabin in the Matanuska Susitna Valley where the bodies are being found.
Okay.
And according to Douglas, the perpetrator specifically chose prostitutes and topless dancers because the majority were transients and usually went unnoticed when they were gone.
Right.
And upon urging the local investigators, Douglas began looking into Robert Hansen's background. He took note of the fact that Bob was small of stature, that he was heavily pockmarked from acne, and that he suffered from a severe speech impediment.
Yep.
And due to Bob's unsightly looks, Douglas surmised that he suffered from a severe skin problem as an adolescent and was probably teased by his peers and in turn would have low self-esteem, which would have prompted him to live in an isolated area.
Right.
And Douglas considered the abuse of prostitutes a way for perpetrators to get back at women. And if Bob was the killer, he was probably using them as a way to get his revenge. He is so spot on.
Yeah. I mean, down to the stutter.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Several investigators were familiar with Hansen and said that he was known around the area as a proficient hunter. He earned his reputation after taking down a wild Dall sheep with a crossbow. And perhaps Douglas surmised Bob Hansen was tired of elk and bear and Dall sheep and had instead turned his attention to more interesting prey. And as the profile progressed, Douglas told investigators that if Hansen was the killer, he was probably a, quote, saver, end quote, and would be keeping small souvenirs from his victims.
Like maybe a fish necklace or something like that? Yeah. Okay.
The only way to rule Bob Hansen out as a suspect would be for the investigators to find a hole in his alibi. And Douglas suspected that his buddies were lying for him, and he encouraged the investigators, these state troopers, go in and threaten them.
Yeah.
Threaten them with charges that if they're found lying, they're going to jail.
Yep.
And State Police Sergeant Glenn Foth decided to bring the men in for questioning, and as it turned out, the strategy worked, and both men confessed and said they had not been with Bob Hansen on the night the young prostitute Cindy was abducted and brought to the airport. And investigators also learned that Bob's friends said that he had been committing insurance fraud, saying that his house had been burglarized And he reported it to the police, and all these things were stolen from his home, and it never happened. And he was actually hiding the items in his basement.
They're all singing like canaries.
And after learning of all his deceitful ways, Sergeant Floth went before Judge Victor Carlson with a 48-page affidavit and secured 8 search warrants to be executed against Robert Hansen and his property.
Dun, dun, dun.
Here we go. On August 27th, 1983, investigators followed Bob to work and asked him to come with them to the police station for questioning. And Bob never bothered to ask why they wanted to talk to him, and he just agrees to go along. Now, simultaneously, 2 groups of investigators served warrants on his house and his plane, and investigators found weapons throughout the house, but nothing to implicate Bob in any of the murders. The police did find an aviation map of the area hidden in the headboard of his bed.
Uh-oh.
It was marked with tiny X's all over it.
Yep.
And some of the X's matched up with where the police had been finding bodies.
Right.
Do you want to take a guess how many X's were on this map?
I can't even imagine.
37.
Ugh, good.
37.
Jeez.
Now, just before they leave Bob's house, one of the officers decides, I'm going to look in the attic. I think I'm just going to look in the attic. And when they did, they look up there. It's just covered in insulation, but there wasn't anything up there that they could just see, right?
Right.
Until they started pulling back the insulation. They were like, tear it up, boys. Let's go.
Yeah.
And within the insulation, they discovered a Remington 5.52 rifle, a Thompson Contender 7mm single shot pistol, an aviation map again, various pieces of jewelry, newspaper clippings, a Winchester 12-gauge shotgun, a driver's license, and various ID cards, some of which belonged to the dead women. As incriminating as these items were, the most important piece of evidence found at last was the .223 caliber Mini 14 rifle.
Whoa.
Back at State Police headquarters, Bob Hansen denied any involvement in the murders. They ask him about his plane and flying into the areas where he hunts, and he tells them, quote, I fly out there and hunt locally, end quote. And when they ask him, what type of weapon you firing out there, Bob? He tells them, a .223. And the police look at him and say, well, that leads me to our next question. Sherry Morrow. There was a .223 shell casing found in the grave, and that shell casing came from the same gun that killed Paula Golding. And when they say to him, see where that puts you, Bob, end quote. He says to the police, quote, you're saying that's from my gun? Bullshit, it's not. And the state trooper says to him, quote, everything so far points right back to you,
Wow.
end quote. To which Bob replies, quote, what do you want me to say? That I did something I didn't do? My God, man, shot these girls out here? That I did not do, end quote. He stutters through that as well.
No, does he?
After a brief game of cat and mouse, he grows tired of all the allegations and he says, that's it, I want an attorney. I want an attorney.
Right.
And Bob was then placed under arrest and charged with assault, kidnapping, weapons offenses, theft, and insurance fraud. And they know they have the right guy. The last place to search in his house was up in the attic, the crawl space. That's where they found all of his guns.
Right.
And these shells matched, the ballistics on these shells matched his gun. The shells that are actually left at a gravesite.
Right.
And they have ID'd him as the murderer. He's arrested, and on November 3rd, 1983, an Anchorage grand jury returned 4 indictments against him: first-degree assault and kidnapping, 5 counts of misconduct in possession of a handgun, theft in second degree, and theft by deception in insurance fraud. Investigators were still awaiting these ballistic results. They know that they're correct.
Right.
But they're waiting on them, so the state decided to hold off on charging him with murder. But Bob pleaded not guilty to every single thing, even the insurance fraud. and bail was set at $500,000. Now, the ballistic test results finally came in on November 20th, 1983. The FBI crime lab in Washington, D.C. determined that the shell casings found at the grave sites had all been fired from Hansen's rifle. And they were like, we knew it. We knew it.
Right.
The firing pin and the extractor markings were identical.
Yeah.
Now, given the mass evidence building against him, Bob realizes that the chances of him winning in court were slim.
The jig is up.
So on February 22nd, 1984, Bob had his defense attorney, a guy named Fred Dewey, arrange a meeting with Anchorage DA Victor Crum.
Was his partners Cheatham and Howe?
He works at the firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe.
Can we cheat him and how? Do we cheat him and how? I see what you're saying.
You see what I did there?
I see, but very good.
Thank you.
Fred Dewey tells the DA that Bob wants to, quote, clear the decks, end quote. He's going to confess to these murders.
Oh, wow.
And during the meeting, Crum offered Bob a deal. The DA offers him a deal. In exchange for a full confession, the DA guaranteed him that he would only be charged with the 4 cases that they knew of, and he would be able to serve his time in a federal facility rather than a maximum security institution. And this is a trade-off, but there are 37 marks on this map.
Right.
And they want to try to get these remains to family. They want people to know.
Sure.
So Hansen reluctantly agreed to these conditions. And after both sides signed off on the agreement, Bob Hansen began describing one of his typical abductions. The following transcript, which has been edited for space, was originally published in Gilmore and Hale's book. Quote, I pull out the gun. I think the standard speech was, look, you're a professional. You don't get excited. You know there is some risk to what you've been doing. If you do exactly what I tell you, you're not going to get hurt. You're just going to be counting this off as a bad experience and be a little more careful next time who you're going to proposition or go out with. You know, I tried to act as tough as I could to get them as scared as possible. Give them that right away, even before I started talking at all. Reach over, and hold that head back and put a gun in her face and get them to feel helpless, scared right there. I'm sure maybe it's not the same procedure for you. You always try to get control of the situation, so some things don't start going bad. Or maybe I've seen some cop shows on TV. I don't know. Okay? End quote.
Jeez. Okay.
And whenever Bob got a victim under his control, he would normally take her out to his plane, fly them to his remote cabin, and according to Newton, he would brutally rape and torture the women, and then afterwards he would strip them naked, sometimes going so far as blindfolding them and setting them free in the woods. Then Bob would give his victim a brief head start and then hunt them down with a hunting knife or a high-powered rifle. In describing his hunts to investigators, Bob said that it was like, quote, going after a trophy doll sheep or a grizzly bear, end quote.
Sick.
In the end, Bob confessed to murdering 17 women and raping another 30 over a 12-year period.
Wow.
He pled guilty on February 18, 1984, to 4 counts of first-degree murder in the cases of Paula Golding, Joanna Messina, Sherry Moreau, and Eklutna Annie. 1 week later, on February 27th, Superior Court Judge Ralph E. Moody sentenced him to 461 years plus life without the chance of parole.
Man.
Then he was remanded to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
By May of 1984, investigators had found 7 bodies at the grave sites that Bob pointed out to them. No other bodies were ever recovered. The 7 bodies they recovered were Sue Luna, Malai Larson, Delynn Frey, Teresa Watson, Angela Fettern, Tamara Pedersen, Lisa Futrell, and only 12 of the 17 bodies Bob confessed to have ever been found, and there are 37 X's on his map.
Wow.
In 1988, Bob Hansen was returned to Alaska and became one of the first inmates in the new Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward. And shortly after his conviction, the record keepers for Pope and Young removed Hansen's name from their record books.
Wow.
Those are the people who,
Yeah.
praise you for your bow and arrow, your bow skills.
Right.
Bob's wife and 2 children tried to remain in Alaska, but after 2 years of harassment, his second wife, Darla, filed for divorce and left Alaska for good. Bob Hansen died in prison on August 24th, 2014. He was 75 years old.
Wow.
Now, in 2013, a movie starring John Cusack as Bob and Nicolas Cage as Sergeant Jack Holcomb and Vanessa Hudgens as Cindy Paulson is released. The movie was dedicated to all of Bob's victims, and it was called On Frozen Ground. Although Bob confessed to killing Eklutna Annie, her identity is still a mystery.
Really?
In 2020, they released a new rendering of Annie in the hope that after all these years, somebody could identify her. Anyone with information should call William Hughes at 907-269-5058 or email him at william_Hughes@dps.state.ak. So there's still bodies out there that have never been recovered.
Right.
And one of the women that he was prosecuted for and convicted of, we still don't know her name.
That's amazing.
But that is the story of Bob Hansen, the booker, the baker, the nightmare maker. And that's all I have to say about that.
It's always amazing to me that somebody can go that unnoticed for so long.
Undetected for so long.
Yeah, and create all sorts of havoc and torture and just death.
Yeah, and think about how many times he was like picked up for arson and shoplifting and and they just kept letting him out.
Yeah, and you do one wrong thing in your neighborhood and homeowners are on your back.
That homeowners association will get you every time.
Oh, crazy. So anyway. All right. Well, there you go. Bob, you got what you deserve.
Yeah,
All right.
for sure.
Well, let's do a little bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right. Number 1, I'm calling the first one, Don't Tell Anyone.
Okay.
All right.
I won't.
A 41-year-old thief in Maine named Kevin Gray ordered a rideshare to local TJ Maxx.
One of my favorite places.
Right, yeah. But he then blabbed to the driver about how he was going to rob the place. The driver dropped him off, and then he called the cops.
Hey, guess what? Thanks for the ride. I'm going in here to rob the place.
The police identified the passenger as Gray, and in addition to being a suspect in a crime committed the previous day, they saw that he had warrants out.
He's on a roll.
Yeah. When they saw him exit the TJ Maxx and approached him there was a small foot chase, but they caught him and he was arrested. Gray had several sets of pre-conviction bail conditions that barred him from several businesses in the area because, can you guess?
He's a shoplifter.
You got, because of the theft charges at those stores. Gray is facing charges in relation to theft as well as drug possession, warrants, and violations of conditions of release. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he just sort of like piled them all up.
Did he steal money or he was stealing items?
I have no idea.
I think he was stealing items because he's got the shoplifting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's not going in and robbing them, give me everything in the cash register.
No, he was going in stealing.
He's going in and saying, give me all your designer handbags.
Give me some placemats. Yeah.
They do
All right.
have good placemats.
Yeah. Number 2, porch pirate. Yeah, hold my beer.
Porch pirate.
A man named Robin Swanger was arrested for stealing a neighbor's porch from the front yard.
His whole porch?
Yes, the whole porch. All 8 feet by 10 feet of porch.
Wow.
Well, the house had been removed from the lot, but the property owner says the porch was not up for grabs. So it was just a porch to nowhere in the middle of an empty lot covered in a no trespassing sign.
And somebody thought, that seems like fair game.
Yeah, well, the owner of the porch said that it was not up for grabs, even though they moved the home off the lot. But during the investigation, the porch reappeared on the lot, but was upside down.
Oh.
Yeah, police are looking for Swagger for days in relationship to the investigation. Well, they found him when they got a call from his residence on a domestic abuse situation.
Oh, his woman turned him in.
Yep, Swanger was arrested for the porch theft and also charged with 2 counts of domestic violence.
There you go.
Oh my gosh.
Telling you.
Yeah. All right, and number 3, and finally.
And finally.
I didn't think about that part.
I say that a lot.
A 19-year-old guy is in some trouble after carjacking a woman driving for a rideshare company.
Okay.
Jeremiah Vedner Charles ordered a Lyft ride back in October.
Oh, we're back in the lifts again.
Yeah.
Okay.
According to reports, once he got to his destination, that's where things took a turn. Now, this gets kind of ugly. Charles punched the female driver in the head, arm, and stomach. While being continuously hit, the woman jumped out of the car. It was at this point Charles hopped into the driver's seat and took off with the woman's Toyota Corolla.
Okay.
However, it wasn't too hard for police to track Charles down. He booked the Lyft ride through his own account with his real name. A subpoena to the Lyft company gave cops all his information and they tracked him down. They even found the victim's car near his home.
I hope they brought her over there and they just stood him up and they're just give him a good kick in the cookies. Get him back. Hit him in the cookies.
He deserves to be arrested just for being stupid. God.
That's pretty good.
Well, there's your bless your hearts.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing or somebody who needs a good swift kick in the cookies. All you got to do is go to Hitched to Homicide. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu, and while you're there, you can also suggest a case or tell us about your brush with true crime.
Please do.
That's my amazing husband out there.
And it's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.